Your Humanities Half Hour is brought to you by the Northern Marianas Humanities Council, navigating the human experience together.
Hafide, Tiro, and welcome to Your Humanities Half Hour. I'm Catherine Perry, and today we are talking with longtime and semi-retired attorney here in the Marianas, Robert O'Connor. Bob, welcome.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm well. How are you today?
Fine, thanks.
Man, you have been here almost forever. Came here in 1983,
Yes.
34 years old. How did you even find out about the Marianas?
I was happy as a clam working in the Ventura County District Attorney's Office. Had my own house, I had a dog, I had friends, I enjoyed my job, and I got a phone call from Rex Kosak. Rex Kosak was told by Governor Pete Tenorio that he was going to be Pete Tenorio's next Attorney General. So Rex and I had been friends. Rex had worked in the Ventura DA's office, and he asked me if I could come out for a year to help him put together the Attorney General's office. So I asked my boss if I could have an 18-month leave of absence. He said yes. So I flew out here in December 1983.
You have an interesting story about your swearing in to the bar here.
Oh, yeah. Well, 2 years later, a year and a half later, I took the bar exam. After I left the Attorney General's office, I took the bar exam. And I passed the bar exam. And I found out on a Friday afternoon I'd passed. So you have to go to the court and have a local judge swear you in. So I got in my Jeep with my dog, and I drove to the courthouse, and it was Friday afternoon. There was only one judge left, Judge Soule. He said, "Bob, meet me in the courtroom and I'll swear you in." So I went into the courtroom. I was wearing flip-flops and shorts, and the judge said, "Where's your witness?" I said, "Judge, I didn't know I had to bring a witness." He said, "You have to have a witness." And I said, "Well, my dog, Skeeter, is in my Jeep." He said, "That'll do." So I went out in the parking lot, got my dog Skeeter, a little black lab, brought him into the courtroom. The judge swore me in as an attorney, and then wrote down witness Skeeter O'Connor.
So you originally planned to be here for only 18 months. What made you decide to stay?
I was in the Attorney General's office for 13 months, and I quit. And then I became a boat captain. There was a ship here, a 120-foot ship, that had been originally bought by a drug dealer who had then been arrested, and he needed somebody to make money on the ship. And I convinced the governor to let me captain that boat to take things up to the northern islands. You know, like goats and rice and nurses and ballot boxes. And so I would take that ship up and down to the northern islands. And that was kind of boring, so I took the bar exam, and I passed the bar exam. And the day after I passed the bar exam, I ran into Larry Hillblum in a snack bar, and he said he was going to open a law firm the next day on the beach, in a house on the beach. And instead of me going back to the Ventura County DA's office, would I like to start a law firm with him? So that's why I stayed.
One other interesting other thing happened when you were at the AG's office. You helped start an annual competition now for high schoolers, better known as?
The Attorney General's Cup.
Yeah.
It's in its 40th year this year.
Yeah.
And when I got in the Attorney General's office, I was thinking that Rex and I should start something to make the Attorney General's office more a part of the community. And so we thought about a writing contest, but that's not very visual. So I thought, and these days they had no forensics here. So I suggested to Rex we start a speech contest, call it the Attorney General's Cup. And he thought that was a good idea, so we contacted the local high schools, told them that we were going to have this contest. They should pick one person from their school to represent their school, and then we would pick a topic like something to do with the covenant or the Constitution. And so the first Attorney General's Cup was exactly 40 years ago, and the winner of that cup was Dr. Norma Ada. She did a very good job, very good speech. And I went to a wood carver in the woods a Palauan guy who made trophies, and he carved out a trophy for the Attorney General's Cup that had space on it for about 8 names, because we never thought the Attorney General Cup would last 40 years. And if you won the Attorney General's Cup, your name would be carved into this plaque and put on our wall. And interestingly, 40 years ago, when the Attorney General's Cup was first inaugurated, in the Attorney General's office, there was a 2-man criminal division, only 2 lawyers. One of them was Alex Castro, who's now the Chief Justice, and the other one was Eddie Manabusen, who's now the Attorney General. So this year, when the Attorney General's Cup takes place, I'm pretty sure Eddie Manabusen and Alex Castro will be there just like they were 40 years ago.
Yeah, really a great, I remember being in high school, and that was always a big inter-school rivalry thing, was who is going to win the Attorney General's Cup. You were also, of course, been a part of a number of historic cases here in the Marianas, including the first case heard in the CNMI Supreme Court. Can you tell us about that?
Well, to give you a little bit of background, the covenant provided for us to have a Supreme Court, but we didn't have one until 1989. And we got the Supreme Court because an infamous local lawyer by the name of Ted Mitchell noticed in the covenant we should have a Supreme Court, and he was the plaintiff's counsel in a series of Article 12 cases. Article 12 is that section in the Constitution that says that only local people with Northern Marianas descent blood can own fee simple and land. And he'd filed multiple lawsuits where he was trying to upend lease agreements between investors, like Japanese investors who were building hotels and office buildings, for claiming that they orchestrated their lease agreement in such a way as to take away the fee simple from local people. But he was afraid that he might not win his cases on appeal. So what better than to have your own Supreme Court? So because of his lobbying efforts, the legislature passed a bill to create the CNMI Supreme Court. And they appointed 3 very fine lawyers to the court, Jesse Borja, Joe Dela Cruz, and Ramon Villagomez, very respected local lawyers. And Ted Mitchell, coincidentally, had been their boss at one time when he was in charge of Micronesian Legal Service Corporation. He had hired every one of those 3 justices. So Ted Mitchell at least had things set up the way he wanted for his Article 12 cases. But before the Article 12 cases could work their way up to our local Supreme Court, another case was filed. The first case before the Supreme Court had nothing to do with Article 12. What happened was a group of people on the island had circulated petitions to put on the ballot a constitutional amendment to outlaw casino and other forms of gambling in the CNMI. And in order to pass, it had to get so many signatures, several thousand signatures. Then the voters had to pass it by 2/3 vote. So they got enough signatures, they thought, and it was going to be on the ballot. And the people who own poker machines, primarily Willie Tan, who owned a lot of poker machines, didn't want that to pass, didn't want it on the ballot. So Willie Tan hired 10 accountants to go through every signature on the petition to see if he could disqualify the signatures, because you weren't a resident, because you weren't registered to vote, because your signature didn't match your name, because you were the wrong age. There was a multiple list of reasons. And hired me as a lawyer. I went to court in front of Judge Hefner, and Judge Hefner disqualified enough signatures to take it off the ballot. So I was on a Monday before a Saturday election. Ted Mitchell then was hired to go to the Supreme Court to appeal Judge Hefner's decision to put it back on the ballot so people could vote
within 5 days.
Within 5 days. So the Supreme Court, he filed for a writ of mandamus. The Supreme Court said, okay, we're going to have a hearing. I think the hearing was going to be on Friday afternoon, and we're going to decide whether Judge Hefner was right or wrong, whether the people should be able to vote on this or not. So I'm the lawyer who's defending the people who wanted to take it off the ballot. And I think I'm in pretty deep trouble, because I notice as I'm preparing for the hearing that of the 3 justices on the court, all of whom who had worked for Ted Mitchell, by the way, of the 3 justices on the court, one had signed the petition. The other had written a letter to the editor in favor of the petition. So under normal circumstances, those 2 justices should have recused themselves for conflicts. But the law that we had passed creating the Supreme Court didn't provide for secondary justices to take the place of a recused justice. So the justices said, we can't recuse ourselves. There's nobody to take our place. We have to go ahead with this potential conflict. So then I walked into the court that day. There's Ted Mitchell. Jim Cyrock was there because he represented the Election Commission and me. And as I walked in, Justice Villagomez handed me a 2-page document saying, I gave this to Mr. Mitchell yesterday. Here's a document from the Constitutional Convention on the Gambling Initiative. Be prepared to talk about it at today's hearing, which, by the way, was going to start in 1 minute. So, needless to say, the Supreme Court ruled that Judge Hefner was wrong and put the initiative back on the ballot, and the next day the people voted on.
What was the outcome of the vote?
It needed 66 2/3, and I think it got something like 65.5%, so it didn't pass.
It's a good story of the growing pains of a young Commonwealth trying to, like you said, there was nothing that allowed judges to recuse them or justices to recuse themselves. And, was there anything else odd in that first case about it was the Supreme Court? Did we do things well at that time, or were there any dogs called as witnesses?
It was just a strange feeling because I think for everybody it was a strange feeling. There'd never been a hearing before. They hadn't accepted a case for oral argument. It was new for everybody. It did not feel comfortable under the circumstances, but that's the way these things sometimes start, and from there the Supreme Court, of course, is still there today and operating efficiently and doing well.
You were also part of the first, if not only, you might know better than I do, televised court case in the CNMI?
I'm pretty sure it's the only case that was ever televised. This was when Pete Tenorio ran for a 3rd term against Froilan Tenorio, who was the incumbent at the time, and Pete Tenorio won the election. But when he had won the election to his 2nd term several years before, on that same ballot was an initiative to declare that from now on governors could only serve 2 terms. But that was passed the day he was elected for his 2nd term. So the question is, would that apply to him? And I was hired on behalf of Pete Tenorio and his Lieutenant Governor, Jess Sablon, in that case. And of course, there was an enormous amount of interest in this case. So this local TV station asked the court, could we please televise it? As far as I know, it's the only time this TV station has ever asked to televise a case. So when I went to court that morning to argue the case, the courtroom was completely full, standing room only, and there were at least 100 people outside of the courtroom, and policemen everywhere. There was one camp of people who wanted Froilan Tenorio to win. One camp of people wanted Pete Tenorio to win. And there were police officers there to keep the peace in case it got rowdy. And there were television sets. And Eddie Manabusen, who's now our Attorney General, was the presiding judge at that hearing. And as far as I know, that's the only case that was ever televised.
Did the police have to step in at any point?
Not at all. It was, people here don't get that upset about politics where they're going to get in fist fights or shouting at each other. It was very peaceful. There was no...
Especially in court.
Yeah, especially when a lot of policemen around. Yeah. So there was no reason for the police to be there. It was just precautionary and nothing bad happened. And the judge did not issue his ruling from the bench. So nobody knew what the decision was until the next day when he issued his decision in favor of Pete Tenorio.
You actually worked with Governor Tenorio for quite a while, and you had a good relationship with, a good friendship with him. You mentioned one time that he actually called one of your family members.
Yeah, he was a delightful fellow to work with and very unusual, not behaving the way you would think a governor would behave, and I mean it in a positive way. So I'd been working with him for several months, and he went to Washington, D.C. for some reason. And my dad lives in the Washington, D.C. area. And he got a phone call one day. Hello. Hey, Mr. O'Connor, this is Pedro Tenorio from Saipan calling about your son. Oh, Pedro Tenorio? How do you pronounce that? Pedro Tenorio. I can't hear you, Pete. What's your real name? Pedro. Okay. Yeah, what do you know about my son? Well, I just know he's doing well and he's having fun and I think he's doing a good job. And okay, well, Pedro, that's really nice of you to say that. By the way, how do you know him? Do you play baseball with him or something? And governor said, no, I'm the governor. And that was kind of typical of Pete Tenorio. When I was in the Attorney General's office one day, I got a phone call. I answered the phone. Hello, Bob, this is Pete. Pete who? The governor. Oh, governor, what can I do for you? And he was calling to tell me that Dr. Dela Cruz, who ran the quarantine up at the
animal quarantine,
for your animals. My dog Skeeter was in quarantine for 120 days. And Dr. Dela Cruz wanted to charge him an extra $12 because 10 cents a day for putting hot water on his dog food.
Which you had requested specifically, please warm water and put it on Skeeter's food.
Yeah, I love Skeeter. And he did it, but he never told me he was going to charge me to do it. And I picked up Skeeter at the end of the quarantine, and Dr. Dela Cruz wanted me to pay him an extra $12. And I hadn't paid. So he complained to the governor, and the governor called me up and asked me, Bob, will you please pay Dr. Dela Cruz his $12? And another time I was asked to investigate corruption inside of the government. And while I was in the middle of this investigation, which was a traumatic investigation, the person investigating went to the legislature to try to get me off the investigation. And he was politically connected. And so one day I'm in Pete Tenorio's office and he reaches in his drawer and says, Bob, I just want to show you something. And he showed me a draft from the legislature calling me a persona non grata and encouraging me to leave the Commonwealth and go back to California. It was introduced by Congressman Larry Guerrero, who later became the governor, Congressman Joe LaFoy, who later became speaker. He said, Bob, I'm just showing this to you because I didn't like them doing it, and I talked him out of introducing it and putting it to a vote. And he put it back in his drawer. So he was a real wonderful character. I really enjoyed working with Pete Tenorio, and we were very lucky to have him as a governor for 3 terms.
We're chatting today with semi-retired attorney Robert O'Connor. We'll be back with more after this break.
Looking for resources about Marianas history, culture, and more? Well, check out the Northern Marianas Humanities Council's collection. Our extensive video, audio, and photographic library can be found on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram at 670 Humanities. Or check out the written resources on our website at nmhcouncil.org. And for those who prefer a good book, we also have a selection of local publications for purchase. So, dive in, explore, and share your comments as we navigate the human experience together.
Welcome back. Bob, explain this to me. It has something to do with a law during election time where you can't talk about a candidate I'm not sure what this law is, but you had a case like that. Can you share it?
Many years ago, Larry Hillman was running for Congress in a district where 8 people are on the ballot and the top 4 get in. And we had a cable TV company here in those days owned by a different company owned by Lee Holmes from Guam. And that cable TV company and Mr. Holmes was a little bit of a scoundrel, and he would use the TV company to get his way politically. So he would editorialize against people he didn't like in ways that Larry and I always thought was unfair. Anyway, Larry's on the ballot, and the election is Saturday, And on a Wednesday evening, Lee Holmes gets on his TV station and editorializes to ask people in Saipan, don't vote for Larry Hillblum, he's a bad guy. Larry then came to me and said, Bob, we need to go to court tomorrow to get an injunction because there's a regulation on the Code of Federal Regulations that requires cable TV companies, if they editorialize against a political candidate within 72 hours of the election, to put on a rebuttal. So I typed up a lawsuit on Thursday, and I filed it in the court, and I went to the courthouse in front of Judge Hefner, and Judge Hefner said, I'm sorry, Bob, but I think you filed in the wrong court. You shouldn't file this in the Commonwealth Court. You should have filed in the federal court. I said, Judge, I don't have enough time. He said, sorry. So I left, went back to my office, quickly retyped it.
Because in those days there weren't computers.
Right. I was using blue carbon paper. And I filed in the federal court. And the federal court says, okay, we have a hearing at 3 o'clock this afternoon. Come to court and argue for your injunction, your TRO. So I go to court, I'm sitting at the counsel table, the door opens, out comes the judge, and who is it? Judge Hefner. Because Judge Loretta was on vacation, he was appointed to be the federal judge while Judge Loretta was on vacation. So there's Judge Hefner again, and this time he grants my injunction. So Larry then that night went on TV live and gave an editorial in favor of his candidacy. This was Thursday, the election's Saturday. Then Lee Holmes, Friday, goes on again and editorializes against Larry when Larry has no chance now to rebut that. So that behavior by Mr. Holmes and that misuse of a TV station is what got Larry and I to start thinking about starting a second TV station to compete against him. And that's how the TV station whose studio we're in now started. Larry decided to...
Marianas
Marianas
Cablevision at the time, yeah.
String up his own cables, get his own news department, get his own cameras, go into competition against Lee Holmes's cable TV company. And over time, 70% of the people, the subscribers, switched from Lee Holmes to Larry's channel. And eventually Larry took over and then expanded to Rhoda, Tinian, and Guam. And put this under the auspices of UMDA, who eventually, when they sold the cable TV system that he'd put together, sold it for almost close to $100 million.
You were also part of a case related to UMDA, and it was a very big case, Air Micronesia.
Yes. Some of the folks watching this may remember Air Micronesia and wonder how it came into being. Well, the United States Department of Transportation let all the airlines in the United States know they were going to open up for bidding what was probably going to be one of the best routes in the world, Honolulu to Tokyo and back. So Pan Am, Continental, several other airlines put in their proposals to the United States Department of Transportation saying we'd like to get that route. Continental was the smartest. They came to Saipan. They found UMDA, United Micronesian Development Association, and they realized it was a company that had 1,200 shareholders, little island people from islands all throughout Micronesia that formed this company in the 1960s to improve the economies on these different islands. And if they joint ventured with UMDA in a 50-50 partnership and formed Air Micronesia, then the United States Department of Transportation would say, we like that, we're going to give you the license. And that's what happened. So Continental then got the license, got this great route, and made tens of millions of dollars, but never offered UMDA their share of the profits. So at some point, UMDA said, hold on a second. We keep reading in the newspaper, you're making millions of dollars. You never gave us a penny, and we're your 50% partner. Continental then refused to give them an accounting and tried to take over the corporation with corporate shenanigans, trying to get directors to change their vote, to change the articles of incorporation. Because under UMDA articles, 60% of the stock has to be always owned by Micronesians. That's to stop Continental or a Japanese company taking it over. So Continental couldn't take it over unless they amended the articles, and they tried to do that, and that's when Larry Hillblum got involved and filed this major lawsuit against the operators of Continental Airlines, a RICO action, a racketeering action, which he eventually won in dramatic fashion, And UMDA got to keep their interest in Air Micronesia and eventually sold their interest in Air Micronesia for close to $100 million. That's making a very long story very short.
You've done a great job of that. You've done a great job of hitting a lot of cases in this short amount of time. But what people may not realize about you is that you're quite an avid baseball fan as well, something you've been able to really indulge in during your time here in the Marianas. You and Bob used to do something on the cable TV station.
Bob Coldine and I, yeah. I love playing baseball more than doing anything. So I've always liked to play baseball. Even at my age, I still play baseball in Masters leagues back in the United States and when they'll let me here on Saipan. But when Larry and I eventually got control of the cable TV company here and we're running it as our own monopoly, sort of, because Lee Holmes's station was gone, I convinced Larry that we should have Monday Night Baseball live. So I don't know how many people remember, but every Monday night we used to have live baseball broadcasts from the Civic Center field. And Bob Coldine and I were the two announcers on Monday Night Baseball. And I remember one time when Bob had a cold or something, he didn't show up, and I had to do it all by myself, and there was a half-hour rain delay. So I'm up in the booth, and the picture on the screen is water pouring down on the field, and I have to talk for a half hour when nothing's going on. And luckily, I'm a big baseball fan, so I knew a bunch of baseball stories I could talk about. And one other unusual story is I'm saying now coming up to bat is so-and-so Neradong, and he's batting .373, and Bob elbows me and says, "That's not his name." I said, "What do you mean it's not his name?" "He changed his name." "How can he change his name?" And Bob explained to me on the break that Palauans get their names from their father. And if their father's upset with them for some reason, they can take their name away. And so for this week at least, that wasn't his name. He had to borrow a name from his uncle instead. And that's how I had to refer to him during the broadcast.
And you're still playing baseball with the local players today.
I'm trying to. You know, the 40 and I'm 75 now, and it's 40 and above, and so it's a little bit over my head. I have to admit to that. But they do let me practice with them, and I appreciate that. And every summer I go to Detroit for 3 months and play in the Masters leagues there, where they have teams 60 and above and 70 and above.
Well, good for you, and thank you so much for your time today and for talking story. Any final thoughts before we go?
No, I knew you were going to ask me for final thoughts, and I searched my brain about what would be a nice final thought to tell the folks about. And I think the thing I'm most proud about Saipan when I go back to the United States, and the thing I brag about Saipan when I go back, is the civility of political discourse here, unlike in the United States. And you can be a Republican here, or you can be a Democrat here, and there's no ideological litmus test. The politicians here, the congressmen, the senators, you can appeal to their common sense. What's best for the Commonwealth? Instead of a list of, well, since I'm in this party, I have to be for this, 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 and this. Politicians here use their common sense. They're reasonable. They're not ideologues. And that's one of the things I'm most proud about having an association with this Commonwealth, is that we operate our political system that way.
With respect, maybe?
With respect and without demonizing the other side, because, you know, they're our friends, and in many cases they're our relatives. And let's try to solve problems instead of checking off something on the ideological list that we're supposed to be. So at least in Saipan, I don't think a Democrat has to be these 6 things to be a Democrat, nor does a Republican have to be these 6 things to be a Republican, and that's very refreshing. And it's constructive.
Mm. Thank you, Bob, for sharing today. And thank you for your service.
All right, thank you for having me.
Our guest today has been Robert O'Connor, a longtime and semi-retired attorney here in the Marianas. This has been Your Humanities Half Hour. I'm Catherine Perry.
Your Humanities Half Hour has been made possible in part by a major grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Democracy demands wisdom. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of the National Endowment for the Humanities. For more information or to share your thoughts, contact the Northern Marianas Humanities Council at nmhcouncil.org or on social media at 670 Humanities. That's 670 Humanities.